This is part 2 of our series where we're diving deep into the combat myth motifs in Mark's Gospel. In our last video, we explored some narratives and concepts with regards to the cosmic conflict found in the Hebrew Bible. And as a reminder, we have 5 main categories this cosmic conflict fits into: Yahweh versus the sea, Yahweh versus the dragon, Yahweh versus death or Sheol, Yahweh versus Israel's enemies, and Yahweh versus Satan. Moving forward, we will now begin to assess Mark's Gospel and how he includes these combat myth motifs within Mark's Gospel. Before we get too ahead of ourselves though, we must consider Mark's prologue. Mark 1 through 11 is where the author sets out the very framework for the rest of his narrative. In this section, I will argue that Mark's prologue introduces a relationship between Jesus' ministry and combat, which informs the rest of Mark's Gospel. The prologue consists of 3 main parts. First is the title of the work, which is verse 1. Then we have the scriptural epigraph, verses 2 through 3. Then we have the scene of baptism, which is verses 4 through 11. Each of these elements serve to cement the connection between Jesus, his ministry, and the divine conflict, highlighting Jesus' kingship and thereby his identification as God incarnate. Verse 1 of Mark's Gospel opens up with the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. The term good news or evangelion has become so familiar to us, especially in the context of Christianity, that we may not find it particularly astonishing as a title. Even in the early church, this term was commonly used, and Paul frequently employed it in his letters to refer to the core of the Christian message. While it is indeed associated with the saving work of Jesus Christ through his death and resurrection, its original semantic power seems to stem from its connections with the Hebrew combat myth tradition. The concept of a good report, good news, or glad tidings has deep and ancient origins, some of which we have already explored but didn't make explicit. In an Ugaritic context, the term good news specifically refers to Baal's victory over the forces of chaos, resulting in the construction of his palace or temple, symbolizing kingship. This idea of good news carried profound significance in ancient mythologies, especially in the context of combat myths, where divine warriors defeated chaotic forces and established order and cosmic stability. The triumph of the deity led to a sense of divine kingship and rulership, bringing about prosperity and fertility to the land. Now, in an Israelite context, we see this of particular importance as well. For example, look at Isaiah 52, 7 through 8. We see this idea of good news to articulate the prophet's message of cosmic restoration. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace, and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation and says to Zion, "Your God reigns." Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices, they shout joyfully together, for they will see with their own eyes when the Lord restores Zion. The prophet here is delivering a promise to those in captivity, that God will soon reveal himself to his people for all to see. The prophet infuses this with language surrounding cosmic significance. This is the salvation of Israel and the good news of the enemy's defeat. Kingship of Yahweh is implied here as well. To solidify this, we should take note that the Hebrew word mebaser, the phrase brings good news, is rendered in the Septuagint with evangelismenu, the same word that Luke 21 uses when we read, "On one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel." There's that evangelismenu word. The chief priests and the scribes with the elders confronted him. The same motif and language is used in the book of Nahum as well. Nahum is a collection of poems announcing the downfall of one of Israel's worst oppressors, the ancient empire of Assyria and its capital city, Nineveh. It begins by describing a powerful appearance of God's glory, similar to how the previous book, Micah began and how the following book, Habakkuk, concludes. God, the all-powerful creator, comes to confront the nations and brings his justice to their evil. Nahum 1 verse 15 reads, Behold, upon the mountains the feet of him who brings the good news, Mebaser, who publishes peace. Keep your feasts, O Judah, fulfill your vows, for never again shall the worthless pass through you. He is utterly cut off. The Septuagint again renders this the same. In the context of early Christianity, the use of the term good news or evangelion likely drew upon these ancient associations. The saving work of Jesus Christ, his victory over sin and death through his crucifixion and resurrection, can be seen as a cosmic battle, defeating the forces of chaos and restoring harmony to the universe. Through his triumph, Jesus is seen as the divine king, ushering in a new era of grace and redemption. Therefore, while the term good news in Christianity does encompass the saving work of Jesus Christ, it is essential to recognize it also includes its rich origins in the combat myth tradition. This connection underscores the theological depth and significance embedded in the Christian message of salvation. Drawing on the ancient associations of good news with divine victory and kingship, early Christians conveyed the profound cosmic implications of Jesus Christ's redemptive work. The next point I want to make about this first verse is the wording, the beginning of. In this context, the reference to the beginning, or archi, in Mark's account should not be overlooked, as it signifies the outset or start of the cosmic war in the ministry of Jesus Christ. However, it also implies that this cosmic battle is not fully completed within the scope of Jesus' earthly ministry. The question arises, what aspects of the cosmic war remain unfinished after Jesus' resurrection? For further insight into this matter, we can turn to the book of Revelation, which also depicts Jesus as the divine warrior within the apocalyptic combat myth. In Revelation, we see that Jesus' earthly ministry and sacrificial death marked the beginning of the apocalyptic conflict, specifically in the battle with the dragon. The dragon is fought and cast down from heaven by the blood of the Lamb, which is Jesus. The crucial point to grasp here is that Jesus' earthly ministry, though a significant part of the cosmic battle, is not the conclusion of it. Rather, the ultimate vanquishing of the dragon occurs with the second coming of Jesus in Revelation. This implies that Jesus' earthly ministry serves as a preliminary phase of the cosmic war, initiating the conflict but not reaching its final resolution. Therefore, in Mark's Gospel and in Revelation, Jesus' earthly ministry is portrayed as the beginning or outset of the good news, the initiation of the cosmic battle against the forces of darkness. However, its culmination and final victory over the cosmic adversaries, including the dragon, await the second coming of Jesus and the ultimate fulfillment of God's divine plan for the restoration of creation. This is that already but not yet eschatology put into action. The next part of the prologue is the scriptural epigraph in verses 2 through 3. As most will know, Mark quotes Isaiah, but he combines it with a passage from Malachi 3:1 as well. Here is a table outlining this. Here we can see the combination of the passages for the scriptural epigraph. While Mark only attributes Isaiah, both passages share crucial insights to what Mark is doing here. He is employing passages that present Yahweh as the victorious warrior who proceeds up his sacred way to the temple. To truly appreciate the implications here, we need to see the connection between the combat myth and the Feast of Tabernacles, also called the Feast of Booths or Sukkot. It was at this time, as the agricultural year came to its end, that infertility, death, and disorder became most salient. The forces of chaos would assume their temporary dominance over the cosmos, and the Israelites looked to Yahweh's autumn rains, which would herald the return of fertility and life. In anticipation of such rejuvenation, and akin to other ancient Near Eastern New Year festivals, the festival celebrated Yahweh's defeat of the raging sea and its associated dragon, as well as his victory over death. Central to this festival was the triumphal procession of Yahweh. In this procession, Yahweh, symbolized by his holy shrine, The ark was carried amidst singing and dancing to the temple, where God was then ritually enthroned. We see this as evident in Psalms like Psalm 118. Here we'll read Psalm 118, verse 15, verses 19 through 20, and 25 through 27, as those are the main ones. There are glad songs of victory in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of Yahweh does valiantly. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them and give thanks to Yahweh. This is the gate of Yahweh, the righteous shall enter through it. Save us, we beseech you, O Yahweh. O Yahweh, we beseech you, give us success. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of Yahweh. We bless you from the house of Yahweh. Yahweh is God, and he is given us light. Bind the festal procession and branches up to the horns of the altar. The victory alluded to here is Yahweh's triumph over the forces of chaos. During this event, the ark would follow along a fixed processional road on its way to the temple. This was the Mesilah, or highway, alluded to in Isaiah 40, verse 3, when the prophet writes, "Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." About this very highway, biblical scholar N.L. Tidwell writes, "The Old Testament portrait of ancient Israel's road that ascends consistently maintains an unbreakable bond between Mesilah and sacred sites, specifically the tabernacle, tent, ark, sanctuary cities. In fact, the evidence suggests that the road that ascends to the city gate and continues beyond the gate as the main paved route to the city's temple was on certain festival occasions, notably at Sukkot, a significant part of a sacred way, whose two termini were the temple within the city and a natural sacred site outside the city walls. This same idea is also present in Malachi, but with different rhetorical purposes. While Isaiah is concerned with Babylon's subjugation of Israel and the hope of her restoration, and focuses on the divine warrior component of the festival with its victory over the chaos enemy and the consequent rejuvenation, Malachi, on the other hand, has a rather narrower concern. Writing after the temple has been rebuilt, his message seeks to address the ritual impurity of the people, which he feels to be in a state of serious breach. Thus, in his call to reform, Malachi employs instead the festive image of the temple's repurification and general cleansing of the people. In this ritual, the Ark of Yahweh would leave the temple so that the purification could take place. After purification is complete, the Ark would then return along the sacred way for reinstallation, where their offerings would once again be pure and efficacious. All this is present in Malachi's metaphor. Malachi 3 verses 1 through 4 reads, "See, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Indeed, he is coming, says Yahweh of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the descendants of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, until they present offerings to Yahweh in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to Yahweh, as in the days of old, as in the former years." Thus, Malachi envisions a figure who will officiate the ritual purification of the priests and people. This figure he poetically describes in terms of the priestly herald of the New Year festival, who prepared the sacred way for Yahweh on the day of the Lord, that time of annual renewal and ablution of the people. So in both Isaiah 40 and Malachi 3, the processional herald of the New Year festival plays a key role. This was the messenger of Yahweh who, proclaiming the good news of God's victory over chaos, cleared the sacred way for the great procession. In Malachi's vision, which reflects the priestly identity of the original herald and thus his key role in the ablution process, this herald is the leader of the great purification. Like other aspects of the festival, this messenger figure, too, seems to have been the object of cosmic glorification. In this sense, the herald of the festival comes to have an eschatological focus on great purifying figure who shall come at the cosmic new year to facilitate, as it were, the great repurification. Most importantly here, in Malachi, this awaited figure is presented as a second Elijah. Thus, it is understandable that employing a typology of the New Year festival would posit the pure, yet still human, Elijah in the mediating role of Yahweh's herald. What does all this mean? Mark implies from the outset of his gospel in chapter 1 verse 6 and states explicitly elsewhere in chapter 9 verses 11 through 13 that John the Baptist is indeed the second Elijah. Mark's epigraph is also immediately followed by the appearance of John the Baptist and his preparatory work for Jesus. So the point here is clear. John the Baptist is the typological herald of the good news, readying the eschatological sacred way for Yahweh, the warrior who conquers the sea, the dragon, death, Israel's enemies, and Satan. But this time, Yahweh has shown up as an incarnated divine warrior, Jesus. This gives us the context to truly appreciate the significance of John the Baptist, what he says, and what subsequently follows in the baptism of Jesus. Malachi 3 looks to a great purifying herald who shall refine the people. So John washes the people and mediates their reformation. Isaiah 40 looks to Yahweh's coming with strength down the sacred way. So John speaks of Jesus, saying, "After me comes the one more powerful than I, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to stoop down and untie." John then says, "I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit," acknowledging that this purification is not the ultimate cleansing. Jesus shall cleanse by the Spirit of God, while he merely cleanses with water. Moving on to Jesus' baptism, Mark 1 verses 4 through 11 read, "John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins, and all the country of Judea was going out to him, and all the people of Jerusalem, and they were being baptized by him in the Jordan River, confessing their sins. John was clothed with camel's hair, and wore a leather belt around his waist, and his diet was locusts and wild honey. And he was preaching, saying, 'After me one is coming who is mightier than I, and I am not fit to bend down and untie the straps of his sandals. I baptized you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit.' In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee, and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And immediately coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens opening, and the Spirit, like a dove, descending upon him, and a voice came from the heavens, 'You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased.'" Something we've mentioned in the past is the connection between these chaos traditions and the Exodus event, Reed Sea, as well as various rivers. Think back to what we saw in previous videos. In the Ugaritic text, Leviathan has another name, and that name is Nahar. In the Baal cycle, Baal becomes king of the gods when he defeats Nahar, and Nahar is his cosmic rival, and Nahar is also referred to as Leviathan. So Baal is the one who overcomes chaos and becomes king of the gods. In the KTU we read, "What enemy rises up against Baal? What rival faces the Cloud Rider? Didn't I crush El's beloved Yam? Didn't I annihilate Nahar, river, the great god? Didn't I leash dragon and bind him in a saddle? I crushed the sinuous serpent and circler, the seven-headed monster." So rivers can and are connected to these chaos traditions. We see yet another instance of rivers falling into this motif. Joshua 4 verses 23 through 24 read, "For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." In this sense, Yahweh displays his control yet again over the waters. In this instance, it isn't the Reed Sea, but the Jordan River. which is a nahar. With this, we can go to Psalm 114, which paints the Reed Sea and the Jordan River amongst the defeated enemies of the Exodus event. Psalm 114 reads, "When Israel went forth from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of a foreign language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled, the Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. What ails you, sea, that you flee? Jordan, that you turn back? Mountains that you skip like rams, hills like lambs. Tremble earth before the Lord, before the God of Jacob, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flint into a fountain of water." To make the combat myth or chaos traditions more explicit here, consider the following passage from the Ugaritic Baal cycle. Baal gave forth his holy voice. Baal repeated the issue of his lips, his holy voice covered the earth. At his voice, the mountains trembled. The ancient mountains leapt up. The high places of the earth tottered. The enemies of Baal took to the woods. The haters of Had to the mountainsides, and the mightiest Baal spoke. "O enemies of Had, why do you tremble? Why tremble, you who wield a weapon against the warrior?" Baal looked forward. His hand indeed shook. The cedar was in his right hand. So Baal was enthroned, and returned to his house. In both texts, the mountains leap at the god's power, and the trembling ones are taunted for their fear of the victorious divine warrior. Having now established that the Jordan can be and has been incorporated into these combat motifs, one may indeed consider whether the Jordan River should be read in such a light at Jesus' baptism. Interestingly enough, both scholars and religious leaders have indeed read it as such. Consider Cyril of Jerusalem writing in the 4th century when he says, "According to Job, there was in the waters the dragon that draws up Jordan into his mouth. Since therefore it was necessary to break the heads of the dragon in pieces, he, speaking of Jesus, went down and bound the strong one in the waters, that we might receive power to tread upon serpents and scorpions. The beast was great and terrible. No fishing vessel was able to carry one scale of his tail. Destruction ran before him, ravaging all that met him. The life encountered him, that the mouth of death might henceforth be stopped. And all we that are saved might say, O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory? The sting of death is drawn by baptism." We see a lot of the themes mentioned previously packed into this one passage. For now, I just want to express a few things. First of all, there is an ascription of baptism as a descent into the waters for battle with the Chaos Dragon. In this case, Jesus descends into the Jordan, which was at the same time a descent into death. Cyril also explicitly links the dragon of the Chaos Kampf with Satan, and applies the combat myth language of binding and trampling again. All of this is being applied to Jesus' baptism in the Jordan. Now, one may indeed object and say this is not an example of combat because Jesus is not battling the river, but just merely entering in it at his baptism. However, we have examples of the combat myth tradition being employed in just this way to articulate the Exodus event. For example, the song in Exodus 15 doesn't present God fighting the sea, but as miraculously dividing it so his people may pass. And when God splits the Jordan River for his holy ark to cross, despite Yahweh indeed not physically fighting the Reed Sea and the Jordan, they are intimately connected with the Hebrew Chaos Kampf, which is made evident by the passages we just went over. So both the Reed Sea and the Jordan include Yahweh miraculously splitting the waters. The biblical authors make both of them objects of the Chaos Kampf, and the same is likely true here in Jesus' baptism. While Jesus does not battle the Jordan, he passes through it. For example, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus is shown to be like the Ark of the Covenant, moving towards Jerusalem to be established as a ruler. If we go along with this idea, we can notice that Mark prepares for this comparison when he describes Jesus crossing the Jordan River, which is, like his initiation or starting point, similar to a baptism. In the past, according to the Bible, Yahweh and the Ark of the Covenant crossed the Jordan River as they entered the promised land of Canaan, marking the beginning of their victory. Similarly, Jesus' baptism in the Jordan marks the start of his ultimate victory over the forces of evil led by Satan in the world. In other words, Jesus' baptism in the Jordan inaugurates the final eschatological conquest. More on this in a different video on this topic. Moving on, Jesus is also described as going up from the water in Mark 1 verse 10, and immediately going up from the water, or in Greek, ke thous anabanio nektu hydathos. And as we have already covered, that the divine warrior would go up from the water matches well with the traditional terminology of the festival, as Yahweh, after defeating the Chaos Waters, would go up the processional way in the form of his ark to the temple. Interestingly enough, the Septuagint translates the Hebrew word Allah, which means to go up, ascend, or climb, in the associated passages with the Greek word anabanion. So if it's the case that Mark was seeking to make associations with the Chaos Kampf here, then we would expect him to be using the terminology associated with it, which is exactly what we see. Next, as soon as Jesus begins ascending from the water, in typical apocalyptic fashion, the heavens are torn apart and Yahweh's voice issues from the heavens, declaring, "You are my beloved Son, in you I delight." If we turn to Psalm 2, a psalm celebrating the Davidic king's enthronement, we see something interesting. And indeed, scholars like Tremper Longman and Daniel G. Reed point this out. Next, as soon as Jesus begins ascending from the water, the heavens are torn apart, a typical apocalyptic motif. And Yahweh's voice issues from the heavens, declaring, "You are my beloved Son, in you I delight." This election is articulated via an allusion to Psalm 2, a psalm celebrating the Davidic king's enthronement. With this in mind, Psalm 2 reads, "Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and his anointed, saying, Let us burst their bonds asunder and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. Yahweh has them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree of Yahweh. He said to me, You are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve Yahweh with fear, with trembling. Kiss his feet, or he will be angry, and you will perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Happy are all who take refuge in him." When hostile nations plot against the king, it's Yahweh who helps the king completely defeat them. So, the king's strength essentially comes from Yahweh. Through the words of God, Mark is unmistakably linking Jesus' baptism with the historical event of the chosen and crowned king from David's line. This means that, apart from portraying Jesus as the heavenly warrior, Mark is also showing him as Yahweh's representative, the long-anticipated Messiah. He thus draws upon the enthronements of both Yahweh and King, simultaneously highlighting Jesus' divinity and his messiahship. Both of these kings, the heavenly and the earthly, were warriors who established order and defeated Israel's enemies. Indeed, both had power over the chaos forces, sea, and river, which is even more evident when looking at Psalm 89. Here, at enthronement, Yahweh grants to the new king both recognition as a son and powers over the chaos waters. Psalm 89, verses 25 through 27 read, I will set his hand on sea and his right hand on rivers. He shall cry to me, You are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. This political theme finds itself in Mark. With all this in view, now we can paint the full picture of Mark's prologue. Following John the Baptist, who is the processional herald, Jesus enters the Jordan, which was traditionally associated with chaos waters, passes through and divides them via baptism, much like the ark. He then goes up from the waters as the ark would go up the processional way after defeating the chaos waters, and as the heavens open, a mighty voice declares Jesus as the Son of God, in language from a Davidic enthronement psalm, which likewise grants powers to subdue the chaos waters. Furthermore, that the Spirit is described as a dove may also point to a connection between the Jordan and the chaos waters. Joel Marcus, a professor of New Testament and Christian origins, posits that of the possible interpretations for this comparison of the Spirit with a dove, the most plausible is the theory that the dove is meant to echo Genesis 1:2, where the Spirit soars bird-like over the waters. This theory is supported by the Haggai 15a, in which the Spirit's hovering over the primeval waters is compared with a dove's brooding over its young. For reference, the text Dr. Marcus references in the Haggai 15a and the relevant portion he is referencing reads as follows. He said to him, "In my thoughts I was looking upon the act of creation at the gap between the upper waters and the lower waters, as there is only the breadth of mere 3 fingers between them, as it is stated, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters, like a dove hovering over its young without touching them." This further emphasizes the Jordan as the raging waters, as the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ mirrors the traditional "in the beginning" when Yahweh battled the chaos waters at creation. The baptism of Jesus, thus, stands in a new creation typology. The original battle of cosmogony has its apocalyptic reflex in the origin of Jesus' ministry, his baptism. Finally, Daniel 7 is another apocalyptic text with clear combat myth associations, potentially at work in Jesus' baptism. There, the one like a son of man receives kingship from the Ancient of Days after the destruction of the chaos monster. So here, Jesus, the Son of Man in Mark, is declared Son by God after coming up from the Jordan. All of these elements provide a basis for seeing Mark's depiction of Jesus' baptism as an apocalyptic reflection of the traditional combat myth. Granting the connection, the rest of the event follows the progression expected from the combat myth. Jesus shows his power at the Jordan, goes up from the water, is met by sanctification from the heavenly temple via the dove, and his kingship is highlighted. So we have the battle at the river, ascent towards the temple, and conference of the kingship enthronement. The progression is that of the combat myth. From the outset, then, Mark appears to be weaving a mix of various chaos convolutions. In his prologue, Mark sets the stage for the coming conflict, casting Jesus as the eschatological divine warrior who will indeed travel the processional way for the enthronement once he has defeated the evil forces that threaten Israel. As the ark processed through the Jordan, so does Jesus. Now begins the conquest, the eschatological conquest which will rid the world of evil forces and chaos. These evil forces take 3 principal forms in Mark's Gospel: Satan, the sea, and death. In the next videos, we will turn to Jesus' victory over these cosmic enemies, beginning with his battles against the ultimate villain, Satan himself. In conclusion, Mark's prologue sets the foundation for the themes that will unfold throughout his gospel. By closely analyzing Mark 1, verses 1 through 11, we can discern Mark's deliberate use of imagery and motifs from the ancient combat myth tradition to convey these theological messages about Jesus' identity and mission. Mark's prologue introduces a relationship between Jesus' ministry and the combat myth, employing elements like the title Good News, with its origins in ancient victory narratives. The scriptural epigraph, drawing from Isaiah and Malachi, emphasizes the prophetic anticipation of a messenger who prepares the way for Yahweh's triumphal procession. This scriptural connection highlights Jesus as the fulfillment of these prophetic expectations. Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River further reinforces this connection. The use of the term going up from the water, combined with the tearing of the heavens and the voice from above, echoes the imagery of Yahweh's victory over chaos forces in ancient traditions. The association with the chaos waters is supported by references to Psalms and other texts that link water with cosmic adversaries. The dove imagery also underscores the connection between Jesus' baptism and the primordial chaos. Furthermore, Mark employs language from Davidic enthronement psalms, portraying Jesus as both the divine warrior and the anointed king. The dual portrayal emphasizes Jesus' authority over cosmic forces and his role as the fulfillment of messianic expectations. Overall, Mark's prologue lays the groundwork for the cosmic conflict that will unfold in his gospel, with Jesus taking on the roles of the divine warrior, the messianic king, and the conqueror of chaos. This interweaving of the combat myth underscores the cosmic significance of Jesus' redemptive work. As the gospel unfolds, readers are then invited to journey alongside Jesus as he engages in battle against the forces of darkness, bringing hope, victory, and restoration to a world in need of God incarnate. Hey, if you're watching this, that means you watched the video all the way through, and I am tremendously thankful for that. If you find value in the work that I'm doing, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. And if you want to help me continue to make better videos and more videos in the future, please consider becoming a patron and joining me in this ministry mission. Until next time.